Hello again, and welcome back to the channel. We are still talking about Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. What I would like to talk about today, I think, is gender in this book, because why not? It's actually kind of interesting. Usually when you say we're talking about gender, what often people think of is, okay, we're going to talk about women. And there are women in the book. They aren't really a driving force in the book, honestly, because the main character is Okonkwo, who is a man, who is a man's man, and we'll get to that in a second. But, nevertheless, let's start with women in the book. Like I said, there aren't a whole lot of women in the book. There are, of course, Okonkwo's wives. And it is interesting to look at them and to kind of observe their behavior. They don't really get the spotlight too often. But one of the things that you see is we've got these women who are trying to live a life around the caprices and the triggers and the fury of Okonkwo, right? Who is a man who is very easily angered. And you see them, as you read the book, trying to take care of the kids, take care of the household, take care of each other, and at the same time not set him off. And I think anybody who's lived in an abusive relationship would probably recognize the way these women behave sometimes as they try to placate him and make him happy, knowing full well that they have no real way of predicting what's going to make him mad. I mean, there was one point where one of the wives dropped a pot. And Okonkwo is not a poor man. Okonkwo is wealthy in his village, and the loss of a pot isn't going to break him. But he flies into a rage, and he hits her. There is the Week of Peace, which is a whole very important ceremony in the village where you're supposed to be peaceful, make peace with other people. You're not supposed to hit anyone or fight or anything like that. And of course, Okonkwo smacks his wife around, and he's got to pay for it with a donation to the village. At one point, Okonkwo has a gun, right, which doesn't work. It's old, it's rusty, it doesn't work, but he still likes it because it's a gun, and guys like guns. And one of his wives makes a joke about guns that don't shoot. And he flies off the handle, and he tries to kill her. He tries to shoot her with the gun, but of course the gun doesn't work. I have to explain to my students what that joke is, and that's good fun. But nevertheless, a lot of what these women do is trying to survive and trying to get their house together with living with this kind of stick of dynamite of a man. The other sort of major woman in the story is Chielo, who is the oracle. And as the oracle, as the sort of the communicator to the gods and the spirits, she holds great power in the village. She can tell men like Okonkwo what to do, and they will do it because they respect her connection to the spirit world. If she did not have that connection to the spirit world, I don't think that she would have really had nearly as much influence anywhere in the village. Umuofia, let's face it, is an extraordinarily patriarchal place. The men are in charge. The men run things. The men set the laws. The men are the ones who get into the Igugu costumes. The women keep house. The women take care of the kids. The women clean and cook and do all the womanly things. And you can kind of see this very, very strict division of gender roles or gender responsibilities all throughout the book. Some people, of course, try to bend those roles wherever they can, but there's not a lot of wiggle room, it seems like, in Umuofia. So, like I said, when we talk about gender, that's usually kind of code for let's talk about women. However, believe it or not, there is more than one gender. There are actually quite a few genders. And one of them happens to be that of man. And our main character is a man. So I think part of what you can get, if you want to apply the gender critical lens to this work, one of the great questions you can ask it is, what does it mean to be a man? Or what is Achebe saying about being a man? And he is examining that through the use of Okonkwo. And Okonkwo, as we have said before, Okonkwo is fueled. The only emotion that he's comfortable dealing with is rage, anger and rage, which has in its source fear, right? He's afraid of being seen weak, and so he sees pretty much every other emotion. Happiness, joy, compassion, sorrow, any of those things are weakness. After he kills Ikemefuna, he is sad, he's depressed, he's bummed out for a while, and he kind of brings himself out of it by going, "You weak woman, what are you doing? You shouldn't be sad. Men aren't sad." And the only thing that Okonkwo can handle really is rage and anger. And I don't think the concept, or at least the name of, or the word for toxic masculinity really, I don't know if it existed in the 1950s when Achebe was writing the book, but Okonkwo is a classically toxically masculine man. He views himself as a man of power, the man in charge. Any infringement on his authority or his power is met with anger, right? He can't handle that. He can't handle people challenging his position or challenging him as a man. He can't deal with the idea that he might be seen as less than a man, which is what, again, drives him to sacrifice Ikemefuna. He is so wrapped up in this idea of what a man should be, and his idea of what a man should be is just awful. It is really, really hostile and dangerous and deeply, deeply unpleasant. And so what we see throughout the whole book is that whenever Okonkwo says to himself, all right, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. He doesn't use that phrase, but a man's got to do what a man's got to do. The things that he does are bad. He hits people, he hurts people, he kills people. He embarrasses people. There's a great scene where he's talking amongst some of his friends, and he's doing anybody he thinks is not manly enough, he does like a little snarky, calls them a woman or insults them to some degree. He cannot handle men who are not men. And, I have heard in reading about, people who are men, especially who are from Nigeria, men who are from an Igbo background. Apparently, from what I read, there is still that kind of thread of masculinity that still exists today. And I've read people saying like, oh yeah, if you're going to, in advice, if you're going to date an Igbo man, you best, make sure that you realize that they have certain ideas about the roles of men and women and how they behave towards each other. Again, this is the internet. I have not done the proper personal research on this, but these are the things that I find because I want to know, how true to life is this despite being set way in the past. But nevertheless, Achebe gives us Okonkwo as a bad role model. So if we were asking the book, what are you saying about masculinity and about being a man? I think Achebe is saying, don't be like this. Don't be like Okonkwo. Don't avoid all other emotions but rage. Don't let your weaknesses, don't let your insecurities drive you to be a terrible, terrible person. And I think that is honestly good advice, really. Because even today we see men who are so wrapped up in the idea of manliness and masculinity that they become just awful. And they're trying to teach these lessons, here on YouTube or Twitch or whatnot. They're trying to teach these lessons of what they think being a man is. And they think being a man is, exerting dominance and being powerful and never crying and don't be sad and don't show emotions and don't be compassionate and don't be nice to people. And they think that's what being a man is. And that would be fine. If that's just them, that's fine. I don't care what you do, Andrew Tate. You do you. But the problem is a lot of these guys are communicating to boys. And we see a lot of boys and teenagers who are following them and they go, oh, okay, that's what being a man is. Being a man is all that stuff. Okay, so I'm going to work on doing all that stuff. And they turn into horrible people as well. So I think Achebe is, into the fact that this is not really a book about gender, it is certainly presenting a very negative view of what masculinity could be. And it's not an all men thing. There are male characters in the book who are much more reasonable and sort of open-souled, as it were. There's Obierika, who is probably the only one who's able to call Okonkwo on his nonsense. So it's a not all men situation, right? Okonkwo is a terrible role model for masculinity and manhood. And if you find your friends or your sons acting like Okonkwo and saying, well, this is what it means to be a man, then they haven't read the book properly. Because Achebe makes it very clear that every time Okonkwo kind of exerts this masculinity, something terrible happens. And in fact, it all really leads up to Okonkwo's end, right? He cannot abide by what he sees as weakness. And when he sees that his whole village has become, to his mind, weak, he thinks he has no other recourse than to hang himself. And so that's it. So that's my thoughts on gender in this particular book. It's a short video. That's okay. That's fine. They can be short sometimes. But in the meantime, if you've got any thoughts on how gender is presented in the book, if there was anything about especially women in the book you think I overlooked, please let me know, because that's always possible. And yeah, until then, I think we got maybe 1 or 2 more videos left, and then we'll be done with this. So thank you very much for sticking around. I appreciate it as always, and I will see you in the next video.